Probably the most overwhelming thing when I do resurface from the Rockaways, I've been there for over 5 weeks, is that there's a huge disconnect between the perception in the city and in the state and in the country and what's actually going on the ground. And it is a dangerous disconnect. It's a disconnect that is killing people, because I think if you turn on the news, even if you turn on New York One or any of the major stations, if you see Bloomberg speaking at one of his press conferences, according to him, everything is fine and things are moving along and the power is coming back on. And there are still over 10,000 people in the Rockaways without electricity, thousands of people without heat. The temperatures are dropping, and there are thousands of families who are living in mold-ridden homes. They've been living for over 5.5 weeks, almost 5.5 weeks, some of them without electricity. You can imagine what that does to your physical condition and to your mental state, to be living, even as a single person in that state, but to be living with children who have been displaced, their schools have been torn apart, the entire social fabric in the Rockaways. And I only want to speak about the Rockaways because that's where I've been, has been torn to shreds. And so I think we're facing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I can't stress this enough, and I think this is really where Occupy has excelled, is that we were some of the first responders on the ground because we don't have any red tape, we don't have any bureaucracy. We all just showed up. I went from working on the Hot and Crusty campaign to showing up with one of my colleagues to see where we can help and plug in, and then I saw some of my fellow Occupy organizers, and we were like, we just looked at each other, we were like, of course you're here. And we just got to work. And how I ended up running the medical coordination for a huge chunk of the Rockaways is that I came across the executive director of Doctors Without Borders, and she was looking where to plug in. She was like, this is insane. This is a woman that's coming from third world countries and was just blown away by the devastation. She couldn't even believe that New York City looked like this. And she needed a place to plug in, so I found one of the Occupy hubs, which is one of the housing complexes up on Beach 57th Street. We found a spot for her, basically right smack in the middle of the projects, and we set up shop there. And I put out a massive call that night for healthcare professionals, for nurses, doctors, PAs, MDs, social workers, mental health professionals, and talking about the human response to tragedy. I mean, I got hundreds of responses from professionals all across the city, all across the state wanting to plug in, and I sent them to this clinic. And unfortunately, a large chunk of them were turned away by Doctors Without Borders because they, for various reasons. And so I went scrambling around to find I need a health clinic, right? So everything is completely washed away. The doctors' offices have been flooded, they've been burned down, the hospitals are shuttered. Peninsula Hospital, which was one of 2 functioning hospitals in the Rockaways, was shut in April of this year, completely shutting off half of the medical care in the Rockaways, flooding an overwhelmed, understaffed, underfunded hospital, completely inadequate, St. John's down at the other end of the peninsula. So you have absolutely no medical resources and a huge catastrophe that has torn the fabric of this community and no medical care. So I think, there was really no other choice at that moment but to hit the ground running like so many of us. We just found a need and we met that need. So I found a space right across from Yana where Occupy had set up, and it just happened that it was a former furrier. I don't even know if that's a real word, I hope it is. A fur shop that was moldy and musty and really disgusting. But it was really the only space that we had, so we cleared it out, and I sent out, Judy and the NYSDA nurses were the first responders. They were the first nurses that came to the scene and said, where should we go? And I sent them out in canvassing teams to go into these high-rise apartments where these folks had not seen another human being for over a week. And then that just continued. Then they hadn't seen another human being for a week and a half, for 2 weeks. We were the first responders to go up into these buildings that had no electricity, and we were finding elderly, disabled, homebound children who could not leave their apartments because their elevators weren't working and they were stuck without medications, without critical care. And these were the first responders on the ground. Not FEMA, not Red Cross, not the National Guard, not the mayor's office, not DMAT, not DOH, none of them. And so what ended up happening is this clinic kind of moved forward and we started sending canvassing teams out every day, is that all of a sudden, all of these city, state, and federal agencies started coming to us, which is a really strange feeling when you go to a FEMA tent and you find out they're referring residents to Yana Medical Clinic. I started a medical clinic that FEMA was referring patients to. If that's not scary, I don't know what is.